A farmer stands still, phone in hand. She's not checking the weather. She's waiting for a message, maybe a voucher for inputs, maybe an insurance alert, maybe a price update from a buyer. Each of these decisions now comes through a digital system she didn't design and doesn't control. The old state marketing boards are gone. In their place are private platforms that track activity, guide choices, and decide what's allowed. This isn't just about new technology. It's about how power in rural markets has shifted, away from public institutions and into private systems built on code. Once, governments organized farming through boards, permits, and guaranteed buyers. The idea was simple. Control the system so development would follow. Today, private companies promise to do the same thing, only digitally, with data, algorithms, and behavioral nudges. They promise efficiency, inclusion, and growth. But whose idea of progress is being built? And who gets to decide how farmers should behave? This video traces the long history of how agriculture in Kenya has been organized. From the developmental state to today's powerful platforms. We'll look at how infrastructure shapes choices, how platforms concentrate power, and how big ideas about development end up guiding everyday decisions on the farm. By the end, you'll understand how data, credit, inputs, and contracts are being tightly linked together again, and what that means for farmers, markets, and the future. Our goal is simple: to explain what's happening, why it's happening now, and what to watch next. In this video, we're going to look back at how rural markets used to be organized by the state and how that role slowly moved into corporate platforms. We'll follow Kenya's path from public marketing boards to today's agritech platforms. We'll ask who sets the rules now, who carries the risk, and who ends up with the value. And we'll see how centralized control has returned, this time in private hands. When infrastructure is designed a certain way, it pushes people to behave in certain ways. That's what we mean here. You build a system that makes one kind of behavior easy and everything else hard. In the past, this meant price controls, marketing boards, and single buyers. Today, it means apps, APIs, credit rules, and data systems that decide who gets access to money or inputs. Platforms aren't neutral. They decide who can join, what is visible, who trades with whom, and at what price. As more people use them, the platform gains more data and more power. The system starts reinforcing itself. That's the loop. In development, infrastructure isn't just roads or storage facilities. It's also the systems that shape everyday decisions. Things like farm inspections, fixed price schedules, or automatic loan repayments deducted at sale. When these systems are tightly connected, they don't just support markets, they control them. Once behavior is predictable, it becomes manageable. Digital platforms work the same way. They decide who can join, what data is collected, what services are available, and how value flows. These systems aren't neutral. They reflect the priorities of the people who build and run them. Next, we look at how earlier governments built these kinds of systems long before smartphones existed. After World War II, colonial officials in Kenya pushed African farmers into commercial agriculture, but only under strict conditions. Secure land titles were tied to loans. Loans were tied to controlled marketing. Farmers followed approved crop plans, sold to official buyers, and had repayments deducted automatically. The goal was simple: steady production and guaranteed repayment. Governments built tightly managed systems. Farm plans, marketing boards, cooperatives, and processors that automatically deducted loans and input costs when crops were sold. Farmers didn't just sell into a market, they moved through a system. After independence, Kenya kept much of this structure. Cooperatives, marketing boards, and state-backed contracts helped stabilize prices and spread modern inputs. But politics shaped who benefited. Some crops and regions got more support than others. For a while, it worked. Then problems built up. Prices were set incorrectly. Payments were delayed. Global shocks hit, and farmers started selling outside official channels when state prices no longer made sense. The system slowly unraveled. Next came a radical shift in thinking. By the 1980s, the message from global institutions was clear. The new idea was that the state had interfered too much. The solution was to remove controls, let prices guide investment, and trust private actors to respond. Marketing boards were closed. Subsidies were cut. Extension services shrank. Rural banks pulled out. But private investment didn't rush in. Credit dried up. Middlemen filled the gap. NGOs ran small, disconnected projects. On paper, incentives looked better. In reality, coordination collapsed. This forced a rethink. If markets weren't organizing themselves, maybe they had to be built deliberately, even within a market-friendly framework. That rethink set the stage for digital platforms. In the 2000s, mobile money took off. It made digital payments easy and widespread. With mobile money and tech hubs, optimism surged. If farmers had information, they'd make better choices. Apps would replace middlemen. The idea was that transparency would fix markets. Soon after, developers and donors launched apps to share price information, offer advice, and connect farmers to markets. The plan was to also fix information gaps and cut transaction costs. But most apps struggled. Farmers trusted people more than screens. Adoption was low unless someone followed up in person. Many pilots never scaled. Gradually, founders changed strategy. Instead of serving individual farmers, they partnered with cooperatives, NGOs, and input companies. Data became valuable. Platforms became intermediaries again. Systems that linked credit, inputs, insurance, advice, and buyers into one loop. Donors encouraged this shift, pushing for scale, monitoring, and behavior change. The result was digital systems that don't just inform farmers, but actively shape what they can do. Today's platforms combine many layers. Weather stations feed data into insurance models. Vouchers can only be spent on approved inputs. GPS and ID systems track compliance. Advice is tailored and sometimes enforced based on what the platform wants to see. Everything is designed to reduce uncertainty and ensure repayment. Some platforms bring together advice, credit scoring, input delivery, and local agents who act like extension officers, but work for private systems. The goal is integration, scale, and stable flows for investors and large buyers. Other companies use similar tools. Contract farming to lock in prices, data trails to unlock loans, dashboards to manage thousands of farmers at once. Each step reduces risk, but also increases the platform's control. So who actually governs these markets now? Donors and investors now wanted precision, better targeting, better measurement, and less risk. This idea required more data and more control. Credit was tied to specific farming inputs. Insurance was linked to planting decisions. Agricultural agents collected data for digital platforms, and not the public sector. Platforms started deciding more things for farmers: what to plant, when to plant, where to buy, and who to sell to. This reduced risk for investors and companies, but it also narrowed farmers' choices. With control over payments and data, platforms could set the rules. Knowledge moved from people to software, from public systems to private ones. If this kind of deep dive is useful to you, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps this work reach more people, and we've got more coming. This isn't just a market story. Platforms are shaped by donors, corporations, and governments together. Behavioral economics provides the logic. Aid programs provide funding and data systems. Meanwhile, public research and extension struggle to keep up. In the next chapter, we look at who benefits and who doesn't. How digital farming platforms guide farmer decisions. Many digital agriculture platforms are built on the belief that farmers do not always respond to prices or information in the right way. Because of this, developers, donors, and behavioral economists design systems that gently push farmers towards certain choices. These pushes, called behavioral nudges, are built into mobile apps, credit systems, and platform rules. The goal is to steer farmers toward practices the platform considers more efficient or economically sound. One common nudge is the use of automated farming advice and reminders. Platforms send farmers regular messages based on planting dates, crop calendars, and location. These messages arrive at specific times and tell farmers what to do next, when to plant, fertilize, or spray. Over time, this step-by-step guidance encourages farmers to follow the platform's recommendations instead of relying on traditional practices or personal judgment. Another approach is shaping farmers' expectations about the future. Platforms use weather forecasts and satellite data to warn farmers about possible droughts, price changes, or risks. For example, a farmer might be told that fertilizer prices will rise soon and that they should buy more now. Even though nothing is forced, this kind of information pushes farmers towards certain decisions. Credit is also used as a behavioral tool. Instead of giving cash, some platforms provide credit as digital tokens that can only be spent on approved inputs from selected suppliers. This limits choice and nudges farmers toward standardized corporate products. Developers often justify this by saying it prevents farmers from making bad input decisions. Insurance products work in a similar way. In some systems, insurance payouts are only valid if farmers buy specific seed brands or inputs. Farmers must activate insurance using codes linked to those products. This design encourages farmers to adopt certain technologies and keeps them locked into a fixed pattern of buying and planting. Platforms also rely heavily on default settings. Many choices are pre-selected for the farmer, such as which buyer to sell to, which inputs to purchase, what crops to grow, or which markets to use. Farmers can change these settings, but doing so takes extra effort. Because of this, most farmers stick with the default options, increasing compliance with the platform's preferred workflow. Some nudges work through social structures. Platform designers study how trust works in savings groups or farmer groups, and then try to recreate those dynamics digitally. The aim is to shape group behavior and social norms so that farmers encourage each other to follow platform rules and recommendations. When farmers ignore platform advice or continue farming the way they always have, developers often interpret this as irrational behavior. From this perspective, nudges are seen as tools to correct farmer biases and align decisions with the platform's economic logic. How are farmers scored and ranked? Alongside nudges, many platforms use scoring systems to decide which farmers receive credit, insurance, or market access. These scores are used to identify farmers who are considered reliable, low risk, and profitable. One source of scoring data is mobile money transaction history. Platforms analyze how often farmers send and receive money, how regularly they repay loans, and how they manage cash. This financial behavior is treated as a measure of trustworthiness. Farmers are also required to complete digital identity profiles. These include personal details, phone registration, GPS location, land size, and crop type. The more complete and consistent the profile, the better the farmer's chances of receiving services. Location and environmental data are also factored into scores. Platforms use information about rainfall, soil conditions, and past weather events to predict risk and performance. The assumption is that more data leads to better predictions. Farmer behavior on the platform itself is closely monitored. Platforms track whether farmers respond to messages, follow planting schedules, activate insurance on time, and buy inputs through approved channels. Farmers who do not follow these patterns may be scored as risky or unreliable. Because loans are often tied to specific inputs, platforms keep detailed records of what farmers buy, where they buy it, and how often. These purchases are compared against recommended crop plans. Farmers who follow recommendations are rewarded with better scores and access to more credit. Where possible, platforms also try to link input use and weather exposure to actual yields. This information is used to adjust insurance products, change loan amounts, and decide which farmers qualify for long-term contracts. Farmers with poor results may lose access to services. Over time, this scoring system creates clear divisions. Farmers who are productive, compliant, and data-rich are rewarded with more opportunities. Farmers who are inconsistent, low data, or less productive are gradually excluded. This reflects a belief that only the most efficient farmers should remain in the system. In simple terms, behavioral nudges are built-in messages, rules, and defaults that push farmers toward decisions the platform prefers, such as when to plant, what to buy, and where to sell. Farmer scoring systems turn behavior, finances, location, and performance into numbers that determine who gets credit, insurance, inputs, or market access. Together, these tools move farming away from open choice and toward guided, and sometimes tightly constrained, decision-making, where platforms shape farmer behavior through data, design, and rules. Platforms often say they include farmers, but inclusion comes with filters. The most bankable farmers get credit and grow. Others fall out of the system. Credit tied to specific inputs locks farmers into certain brands and supply chains. As knowledge becomes centralized, local research and autonomy weaken. Platforms are good at efficiency, traceability, and risk control, but they reduce room for experimentation. In the past, the state used rules and prices. Today, platforms use code and contracts. Different tools, similar ambition. So the question becomes, who sets the rules and who checks them? Platform operators say they're making markets fairer and more efficient. But every design choice reflects priorities. What inputs qualify? What data is shared? What fees apply? Unlike public extension services, these systems answer to private owners and funders. Local agents become sales and compliance channels rather than neutral advisors. Many farmers prefer this to weak state services. But that preference continues a longer shift. away from public coordination and toward private control over what counts as good development. When farmers don't behave as economic models expect, platforms increasingly rely on rules and conditions, not just advice. Next, we look at the risks. First, accountability. When coordination is private, rules move out of public oversight. Farmers have limited say over contracts, disputes, or how their data is used. Second, inequality. Platforms often focus resources on farmers who already perform well, leaving others behind. Over time, this can push smaller producers out altogether. Third, knowledge loss. When advice and inputs come from global systems, local research institutions lose influence. Expertise concentrates elsewhere, while risk stays local. Finally, control. What starts as a nudge can become a requirement. Credit tied to specific inputs, insurance tied to strict practices, prices set by narrow windows. It's efficient, but restrictive. What we're seeing isn't the end of planning. It's the return of planning through private platforms instead of public institutions. The real question isn't state versus market. It's who designs the systems that organize food production, whose ideas they follow, and to whom they report to. Technology could support many different goals. History shows it usually serves the ones who build it first. Here are 6 key takeaways from the current platformization practices in Kenya and other countries in the Global South. 1. Infrastructure shapes behavior. Whoever builds the system defines how farmers must operate. 2. When state coordination collapsed, private platforms stepped in. 3. Behavioral tools become coercive when access to credit and insurance depends on compliance. 4. Scale often crowds out diversity. 5. Data ownership shapes future power in agriculture. 6. Public or cooperative platforms could work, but only if they're funded and supported to scale. In our next video, we'll explore another aspect of the political economy of the food system. If this raised questions for you, leave a comment. And if you want to follow this series on the political economy of food and agriculture, make sure you're subscribed.